I want to address the American Maoists on the internet. I keep bumping into them. I know it doesn't sound like an urgent issue right now because Chairman Deng is now the main threat to humanity. But these things are connected. You know, Maoists and the Stalinists and the Trumpists, they all share one fatal mindset. They all fantasize that as long as you find a guy wise enough, they can give him unlimited power. I just can't think of a worse idea in human history. The idea that you can trust someone, let alone a man, to the extent of letting him decide everyone else's fate is the single worst idea human beings have ever come across. Well, humans have a lot of bad ideas, by the way. It doesn't matter if the guy is left or right, old or young, fat or lean. It doesn't matter what he said he would do. Giving anyone that kind of power is a collective suicide. So the Maoists I bump into online normally defend Mao's record using current economic growth in China. They admit that the growth only happened after Mao died, but they insist that he was responsible because the government was continuous. So let's talk about continuity. You think it was continuous probably because his face is still on the bills and the school kids still have field trips to see his embalmed body. So there's a continuity in the sense of marketing. So Mao is a political trademark. The party uses that face and the same party name so they can enjoy the revolutionary legitimacy. So they don't have to face the tough question of why they are the governing party. They can just say, Mao put us there. So yeah, the same trademark, but everything else changed. I'll give you one simple example. So right after Mao died, before they even decided what to do with his body, a bunch of party elites immediately put Mao's wife and nephew in jail. Those two were Politburo members, for God's sake. And the wife got a life sentence for her role in the Cultural Revolution. And the nephew got 17 years. And also Mao's daughter, who was the deputy secretary of the Beijing Municipal Party Committee at the moment, and she was immediately kicked out of the government. So yeah, the Communist Party was so tired of Mao, they had to purge his entire family. Well, Mao still had some family members from his previous marriages, but they didn't have power anyway. So they were left alone. That's why I just want to laugh, cry whenever I see someone who defends Mao using the policy performance after him. Let me tell you, no one hates Mao more than his own colleagues. They took a huge risk to jail his family. They had to conspire in secret and get it done with a highly coordinated operation so Mao's cronies wouldn't have time to counterattack. So you can't love Mao and the post-Mao Communist Party at the same time because they hated each other's guts. So loving them both just sounds bipolar. You can't love a person but also the people who hated him enough to purge his family. That doesn't make sense. Okay, just because they pretended to respect him for a while doesn't mean they were his best buddies. Every act of persecution Mao's wife did in the Cultural Revolution was endorsed by Mao. So you can't say, oh, they only hated the wife, not the man himself. No way. Of course, it's okay to dislike both sides of the drama. I do, by the way. I think both sides were pretty sadistic and scary. But it's not okay to love both sides. Okay, if you love both sides of a brutal power struggle, oh, look at how they kill each other, so cute. That's just morally and logically contradictory. Okay, another reason I question the continuity of the Chinese system is by looking at the constitutions. I read all of them. The Mao-era constitution and the post-Mao constitutions were completely different documents. The constitutional amendments that happened after Mao's death was not like, the American constitutional amendment. like you add a few lines to a big document over time. No. So 2 years after Mao died, the Chinese constitution inflated from 30 clauses to 60. And then 4 years later, it turned into 138 clauses. So the length of the constitution more than quadrupled as a result of Mao's death. And the content was also completely different. There were no longer terms like the dictatorship of the proletariat or carrying out the class struggle. All gone. Of course, it still names the CCP as the only governing party. That didn't change. But other than that, almost everything was different. You can certainly find some continuity in personnel, but legally speaking, the two systems weren't continuous by any measure. Say, if you cover the country names in those constitutions and ask a lawyer to read them, they're not gonna think those are from the same country. Okay, if you look at the differences in policy platforms, in legal framework, in power structures between Mao and the post-Mao regimes, it was probably bigger than the difference before and after the American Revolution. Even the American Revolution didn't cause that much discontinuity. As I said, the post-Mao reform wasn't called a revolution, but that's for marketing purposes. Those new Chinese leaders used to wave Mao's little book like fanboys. So it was hard for them to proudly tell people, hey, we had a regime change. That'd be awkward, right? But the regime change did happen. They installed a new regime with collective dictatorship by a bunch of guys who used to be persecuted by Mao. If you don't credit King George III for America's achievement, you probably shouldn't credit Mao for China's achievement. If anything, he served as an obstacle. But for the record, I'm also skeptical about the miracle people attribute to the post-Mao Chinese government, which I talked about many times, but that's not even important for today's argument. Whether you like the post-Mao government or not, it doesn't matter. There's just no reason you should like Mao himself, because almost everything he did had to be dismantled before any progress was possible. A one-man rule based on a cult of personality is simply the worst type of government that ever existed. It doesn't matter what kind of man you have in mind, or woman for that matter. Even if it's someone as loving and tender as your mom, you can't give them unlimited power. Just ask yourself this: would you give your mom unlimited power over you? If the answer is no, why would you even consider giving that power to a sadistic man with a wandering penis? So stop thinking it in a left-right mindset. It doesn't even matter at this point. Right now, we need a broad consensus that no person should be given unlimited power. And America is very close to that apocalypse. I know we missed the rapture a few days ago, but it can still happen if you aren't careful.